Good morning. I'm Dusky Terry, President of ITC Midwest. For the third straight year, we are pleased to be the presenting sponsor for the Iowa Ideas Conference and extraordinarily proud of our partnership with the Gazette. As an electric transmission company serving 2/3 of the state, ITC Midwest is invested in and has a very real stake in the future of Iowa. We've supported this conference since its inception because we embrace its mission of gathering hundreds of Iowans together to explore the key questions and the big ideas that will shape the future of our state. ITC Midwest was formed in 2007 to improve electric transmission reliability and increase transmission system capacity in Iowa. And we followed through on that commitment with more than $4.1 billion in capital investments to date. Our investments in the system not only serve the changing needs of customers, they also provide additional capacities to support economic growth and development of low-cost renewable energy resources. Our investments have resulted in a 62% drop in transmission-related outages since ITC acquired the system and began operating it. From extreme weather events such as last year's derecho to the unprecedented transition to renewable energy, from the rapid adoption of electric vehicles to the increasing focus on energy system resilience, the electric utility industry is suddenly in the national spotlight. All of these forces reinforce the critical role of the transmission grid to support the changing landscape and ensure consumers have access to low-cost, clean, and reliable electricity. You know, we often talk about here at ITC about the power of connection, meaning connections are needed to deliver power to communities. There's also tremendous power when people connect to solve problems. Over the next couple of days, I hope you will engage in the breakout sessions, speak up during discussions, and share your ideas to create a brighter future. Open your mind to different points of view as we all work together to come up with the best solutions for making Iowa an even better place now and in the future. I want to thank you for your participation to help shape the future and wish you a great conference.
Welcome everyone to Help Wanted, Job Market versus Demand. I'm CIRAS Golden. I'm the moderator for this panel. During the past several years, Iowa employers in a variety of industries have struggled to meet staffing needs. Our current unemployment rate in the state of Iowa is 4.1%. That has remained tied with Indiana for 17th place in the nation. So we have very low unemployment in Iowa. The struggle has been that we also struggle to get employees in the state of Iowa for some very high demand positions. And as we may have all had some personal experiences with, employers have struggled to just staff to even keep the doors open to offer their regular hours. We've seen recent headlines yesterday afternoon that President Biden is attempting to get some of the larger employers to return to 24-hour service so that they can unblock the supply chain. So this is a very current topic right now, certainly, and we've all dealt with that in our own way. Now, our panel discussion will explore Iowa's current job market and demand, the factors that impact it, and what it will take to ensure Iowa attracts and retains an adequate workforce to meet future needs. Our panelists represent varied industries and agencies that assist Iowa employers with building their workforce, among other things. For their full biographies, please check the speakers tab in that panel within your Whova app. Our speakers are Kate Pine. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning.
Business marketing specialist for Iowa Works. Kate has been with Iowa Workforce Development for 13 years and currently serves as the registered apprenticeship strategist, connecting business owners with prospective employees. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Ron Cox. He's an aerospace engineer, and he serves as director of the Center for Industrial Research and Service at Iowa State University, which helps grow Iowa's economy by linking companies to university and partner resources. Welcome, Ron.
Good morning.
Mike Ralston is our third panelist. He served as president of the Iowa Association of Business and Industry since 2005. ABI is our oldest and largest statewide business organization and is widely recognized as the voice of Iowa business. Welcome, Mike.
Morning. Thanks, CIRAS.
We will start with some framing questions, and we will get to attendee questions after we've dealt with some of those framing questions. You can submit within the chat function in your Whova app. And I will make sure that we answer as many of those as possible toward the end of our discussion. I'll start with this question for Kate, and then Mike, I'd ask you to weigh in on this as well. Kate, what is the current state of employment in Iowa?
Yeah, so thanks for asking.
Big question.
Yeah, big one. You hit the nail on the head when you were saying the unemployment rate is basically steady at 4.1%. It's tied with Indiana for 17th in the nation. The national rate for unemployment is 5.2%. But the more important statistic, I think that's worthwhile to everybody, is the labor participation rate. And a lot of these statistics you can find on the Iowa Labor Market and Information page, iowalmi.gov. But the labor participation rate did inch down slightly by 0.05% from, the actual change in August was from 66.87. And then that was in July, and in August it's 66.82%. So basically we have a labor participation rate, meaning of all the people in Iowa that are of working age, 66% of them are participating in work of some nature. And that equates to the 9th best labor participation rate in the country. And it has been growing steadily and more than 5 points above the national average of 61.7. The other piece that's really important, I think, is for the sheer numbers of what Iowa's labor force actually looks like. And employment has increased over the course of 2021 by 32,400 people participating. And the labor force itself has increased by 40,300. So there's more people working and more people looking for work, but there's still more jobs than there are workers available that people kind of access in traditional manners. So that kind of hits the high level employment and labor participation rates.
So in practical terms, it's a job seekers market.
Absolutely.
So, and in thinking about that question, what the current state of employment in Iowa, Mike, what do businesses come to that with?
CIRAS, I'm going to just say that Kate laid out all the facts, and now I'm going to just talk about some anecdotal evidence. And this is a current topic, very timely, but it's something that has been facing Iowa employers for many years now. I don't know. I think maybe the first workforce discussion I participated in might have been 25 years ago. This was in a rural area of the state where, they just didn't have enough people. But it doesn't matter whether you're in the rural part of the state or an urban area. Everybody's looking for workers. And I know that I'm mindful of a company in north central Iowa, good payer, good benefits, that used to put out a sign, and they'd get 25 people to come in and say, the sign said, we're hiring. They'd get 25 people come in, and they could hire all 25 of them. They were all terrific. Now that same company, of course, has gone much further. They put out a sign, but they do all kinds of other things to search out employees. They can't find any. And that labor force participation rate that Kate talked about is one of the reasons why. And I'll bet Ron Cox will talk some more about the pool that is out there of those few folks that aren't working. But it's really an issue, again, for employers across the board in all parts of the state, not just the rural area. But the anecdotal evidence certainly confirms what Kate laid out statistically.
And as a follow-up for both of you, and maybe starting with Kate, how do regional, national, international employment trends impact our job market? We're not isolated here in Iowa, certainly.
So I can speak a little bit to that from what I've read and kind of the current events. It's very clear that the labor shortage is international and has effects across the globe. Obviously, with the COVID and the pandemic, that really changed the ballgame with the number of people that are available to work. I think the statistics said there were like 5 million people that had passed away, and that changes, who's available to work. There's of course all kinds of things happening in the global market, and I think Mike can probably speak, or even Ron, better to the supply chain issues and some of those other things that are happening with tariffs and trade. But everything does ultimately affect Iowa because we're not completely isolated. We send items and goods out into the world and across the nation, and we receive goods into. And having a talented and available workforce is basically the thing that's going to keep Iowa kind of strong and capable of participating in these global markets.
Mike?
Yeah, I guess I'd say that we see that. I'm mindful of a company located in East Central Iowa that moved their operation here from California. Once they got here, they found out that there wasn't quite enough, the workforce wasn't as large as they hoped. So they opened a plant in another part of the state. They also weren't able to fill those jobs. They went back to California thinking, well, you know what, we better get back to California and open a plant there. They also couldn't find people there. So it's definitely, as Kate mentioned, an international problem, but that speaks to the national situation. I think if you talk to folks all over the Midwest, they're all looking for people.
Mm. Ron, Mike had mentioned that, this isn't a new issue. And while it's been impacted by the pandemic and the stressors that's created on the job market, this is not a new problem. Certainly, you've worked with innovative companies for many years through your work with CIRAS. From your perspective, what's contributed to employment shortfalls, or hasn't allowed us to create that employment pool that employers need?
Yeah, a deep question. There's not one thing that has led to our current problems, but you're right, these problems have been brewing for years, and COVID kind of shined a light on it. Across the world, fertility rates are on the decline, and they've been for some time. I think the US peaked out in 2007 or so, and we are currently not maintaining our population if it wasn't for immigration. And baby boomers leaving and these bubbles of people leaving, retiring is all creating a shortage. You can have a high labor force participation rate, but if you just don't have enough people, you can have 100% participation rate, but if there's not the bodies there to participate, then you're not going to solve your workforce issues. So what COVID in part did was we stayed home and we didn't go out to eat. We didn't go on vacation. We saved our money. Now COVID is getting behind us and people are spending. And that's created a huge demand for products and services across the US and in Iowa. So companies are trying to hire people to meet this increased demand. Supply chains are messing with things. But if you look at the PMI, a measure of month over month change in demand, today we are near where we were coming out of the 1980s farm recessions. It is a huge demand for goods and services. So all these companies are trying to grow. We've heard it from manufacturers, construction, engineering firms, insurance firms. Everybody is having problems finding people. The root issue, though, goes back to people. Iowa has a population problem. We are the 5th slowest growing state in the last 50 years.
Wow.
We just don't have enough people to feed the demand of the companies. And this happened before COVID. In 2015, our workforce flattened out and we stopped adding jobs. We were adding jobs at about 20% of the US average. So this was happening before COVID. Kate mentioned the labor force participation rate. We are traditionally a top 10 state, like she mentioned. We weren't 40 years ago. We pulled more and more people into the workforce, and we peaked out 10 years ago, pulling more people in. We peaked out at about 7% above the US average. So we are a hardworking state, but we were unable to pull more in. I'll stop talking for now, but I mean, there's a lot of things going on that are causing this workforce problem.
Kate, you and Mike both were nodding your head as Ron was talking. Kate, do you have anything that you would like to add to that in terms of, you know, some of the factors that have come into play to get us to where we are with our current labor force?
I think the only thing that I would add is kind of the phenomena of what they call like youth flight, where many of our young people either choose to go to education beyond their K-12 system out of the state of Iowa, or once they complete their degree 2 or 4 year, they leave the state with the thought that they're going to find a better job or a better life somewhere else. I think Iowa Economic Development Authority has put a lot of effort into trying to retain, you know, kind of the people that were born here or come to school here. And not only the kids themselves, but also parents, as like there are real futures, real jobs, real opportunities in Iowa. But that is a big part of the way our population isn't staying, you know, ahead of the game, as it were, is we end up losing too many people that move away.
That's a great point. There was a story in the Daily Iowan yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, about how, you know, we have a lot of the students who go to college and university in Iowa. They're more likely to stay in Iowa. But one of those old standbys, or one of those things that, you know, was always reliable, campus work, the University of Iowa has a huge shortfall in terms of the number of student workers on campus. I think that the Daily Iowan put it at something like 900 jobs they haven't been able to fill. I'll look that up while Mike is responding to that question as well. Factors that got us to where we are today.
Thank you, CIRAS. I would add just a couple things under the subcategory of COVID, and both Ron and Kate have talked about that. A lot of data out there to indicate that women have left the workforce at a greater percentage during COVID. Some of the factors are that they are primary caregivers to people. They weren't able to find childcare or adult dependent care, and so they're staying home, staying out of the workforce to do that. There's some data out there that suggests that folks that were in low-paying jobs have realized or have come to the conclusion that, you know what, we don't want to work in those jobs anymore, that the pay isn't right, or that there might be a safety or health factor that they don't like, and so they're staying out of the workforce. So COVID really exposed a lot of things, and in the end, I'm hopeful that that's positive, because now we can address them.
Yeah, and I'll add on to Mike's comment about women leaving the workforce. If you look at the last 5 recessions in the United States, going back into the 80s, more men become unemployed in a recession in every single one of them than women, except for this past recession. More women have gone on unemployment.
Wow. Wow. I did look it up, and according to the Daily Iowan, the estimate is that they have about 500 student employees in university housing and dining services, and they need 1,400. So it's a huge number. And so I certainly don't want to quote a huge number of 900 student worker positions not being filled, but that's actually the case at the University of Iowa. I'm going to shift to a couple of attendee questions, and we'll get to the future, what the future might look like for our workforce in a little bit. This question is, what are employers doing to encourage and support longevity in a climate of sign-on bonuses and health privacy conflict, i.e. vaccine mandates? And let's see.
I'll jump in on that one.
I was gonna go to you, Mike. So the good job volunteering.
Employers are doing a lot of things, really a lot of things, and I want to say that one can argue some of them should have been done previously. But at any rate, you'll see a lot of employers who perhaps weren't competitive on pay and benefits, and are certainly making an effort to be competitive on pay and benefits now. Those at the top end of the scale are increasing pay and trying to provide benefits at an even higher level. Also, a lot of work with trying to be flexible about workplaces and things like shifts. If somebody wants to work, but they can only work a 4-hour shift, employers are trying to find a way to accommodate that. Or if somebody wants to share a shift, they're certainly doing that, making work available on weekends if that's what people want, or switching to a 4-day, 10-hour week so that people have an extra day off, trying to be creative in all kinds of ways. There are employers out there who are mandating vaccines for all employees. There are employees out there who are opposing vaccine mandates. And so you can probably find an employer that meets your personal philosophy. But boy, employers are trying to do a lot of things. And again, I'd say in some cases, perhaps they should have done some of those things previously. But at any rate, they're trying to do all kinds of things. Incentives is just one.
And along those lines, we've all, I'm sure we've all seen, that the starting wage for many large employers that are struggling. I'm in the Waterloo metro area, and we have the Target distribution center in Cedar Falls, and they raised their starting rate. Target nationwide, I think they're at $15 an hour for a starting wage. We've seen similar things from Walmart. We've seen, is this pandemic pushing that minimum wage up, or that starting wage up?
I think the pandemic and the workforce shortage is pushing the wage up. And, that's the marketplace at work. And again, I'll just say, and then I'll quit it, but I'll say you might make the case there were some employers who were behind the game and needed to do that at any rate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kate, Ron, would either of you like to weigh in on that question?
Yeah, I'll throw in, Mike hit on it, wages. If you look at total compensation in Iowa, we rank 44th of 50 states. So we had room to get better. Even when you take cost of living into account, we only move up to 39th. So we tend to be a lower wage state. And prices, it's what Mike said, Econ 101, supply and demand. And there's a demand for employees. Companies have money to be made. There's a huge demand still out there. I've had 3 companies in the last 3 weeks say they would add 20% employees if they walked in the door tomorrow. And I've heard companies go as high as planning on 10% raises next year to compete for labor.
Wow. And when they say they'll add 20%, does that give you a little trepidation? Because do we have the workers to provide them?
I think we'll get into that in the future, but I'd say, yes, we have them. Yeah. The good companies are going to take them away from those that are not willing to adjust to what is happening.
There's another attendee question that I will put to you. That last question was from Lori Mitchell. By the way, this one is from Nicole Schroeder. I hope it's Schroeder. Did cutting the additional unemployment benefits help Iowa? Mike, could you, what do you think? What are business leaders telling you about that?
I think there's a lot of data out there that suggests Iowa didn't see a huge bounce from that. There are some folks who believe that all the data is not in on that, but I guess I personally don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
So I'll jump in because I looked it up a couple of weeks ago. For each one person that went on unemployment or that's on unemployment today, increase, there are 3 more that have left the workforce. So did our stimulus checks keeping people from working? Did they? Probably not. There are people that decided to retire early. There are people that could not afford to pay for daycare when they had to watch their kids or whatever, couldn't find daycare, and they just left the workforce. The question is, can we pull them back into the workforce?
Mm-hmm. And I agree. What I've seen in terms of the data is that so far we have not seen that pull people back into the workforce. But the stats always trail at minimum a few weeks. So I think we're still waiting to see what that will look like. I think we'll take some time here just to make sure that we get to everything that we'd like to get to, and shift back over to the future of the Iowa job market. If we continue as we are now, Kate, and we don't make any substantive changes, I guess I'll say, what's the future look like for our workforce in Iowa?
I think it's going to be fairly bleak because we are not yet done with the baby boomer retirements. And I think that's going to continue to have an effect. I think if we continue to not change the way that we expect people to work, or we access who's out there wanting to work, we don't change some of our wage and benefit policies, I think we're going to see businesses closing. And it may just be that they can't pay the bills, or it may be that they can't keep up on the timeframes for expectations of customers' deadlines. And I think that ultimately we'll see some changes with how our young people, particularly like in the elementary and middle school, see their futures. And then it'll snowball because they won't see that they have a future in Iowa, and then they'll want to leave even quicker. So without doing some big changes, it's going to be pretty tough for Iowa to be considered, you know, in the even the top 25 of states where people want to live.
And just to put some numbers on it, baby boomers, your younger baby boomers now are in their late 50s, not quite yet 60. They are, and baby boomers in general, you know, they've stayed in the workforce longer, but we're reaching that age where even the younger ones are getting to the point where, you know, especially with the events of the last almost 2 years now, they're saying, okay, well, maybe it is time. So we're on that bubble of, you know, like you said, some people are looking at leaving the workforce, and we don't have enough people to step in. Mike?
Yeah, and we don't see, like, Gen X and Gen Y are particularly small. I think Gen X is the smallest of the generations that's out there. So the Gen Zs and the you know, the kids that are 17, 18, they're not going to hit the workforce and make the impact with their larger population for, you know, 20 years or so, maybe 15. So that's going to be a really, really tough few years in the middle there, as the Gen X and Gen Y fill even a small portion of that gap.
And Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, or whatever you might call the kids that are 17, 18, they aren't, those are not generations that stay in a job for 30, 35 years. So that will have an impact on employers as well. Mike, what are employers telling you? I know a big issue for Iowa businesses are, you know, we have a lot of family businesses, and they don't necessarily have somebody to step in and take over the business when mom and dad retire.
CIRAS, that's a huge issue for Iowa right now, for our state as a whole. We spend a lot of time at our organization working with family business owners to facilitate a transition to either the next generation, or to an employee group, or whatever we can do to help them keep the business ownership here in the state. But it's something that our state really faces all across the board. I did want to say, when we talk about the future and what does it look like, we have employers coming to us all the time, and they say, what can we do on this issue of workforce? And we kind of have three different things we say. One is, you got to make sure your pay and benefits are at a competitive level, and that level ought to be at the highest it can be. You need to make sure you're taking care of your employees first and foremost. Secondly, you need to work with the great resources that are, and they didn't pay me for this commercial, but Kate and Ron represent two terrific resources for employers. Iowa Works has a great database, folks looking for work. CIRAS has a terrific program that Ron is presenting all over the state, that is a way to find workers. It might not be the total answer, but both Kate and Ron can help. And then lastly, there's a lot of talk about Industry 4.0 right now. And, there's been a lot of jargon about Industry 4.0. The bottom line is, it means making sure your business is operating at its highest efficiency, that it's got the right business practices, that it's digitized and automated where it can be, that it's really you're taking advantage of all the latest technology and innovation. Those three things are things that employers need to do now if they want to hope to survive and to grow.
Great.
Karis, if I can make a plug for, since Mike referenced it, one of the services or assistance available through Iowa Workforce and Workforce Development is the Manufacturing 4.0 grant. And you can go to grants.gov, iowagrants.gov, and find the information. And it is specifically some funding available to help companies kind of look at how can they be at the cutting edge of their industry. So that's one of the things that the state is trying to do to help businesses kind of reach that threshold of being competitive.
Ron, I feel like you have to plug now.
I'd like to go backwards because I think we will get to this in due time because it'll come out. I'd like to maybe step back and look at the future. So what's going to happen in the next couple, 3 years to the next 10? Because yes, Industry 4.0 is a big part of that. But these waves, as was mentioned, the baby boomers leaving, are the 2000, every time there's a recession, people have fewer babies. So take the 2008 recession and add 18 years to that. What do you get? In not too much time, we're going to see a decrease in the number of kind of 18-year-olds coming out of high school. That will be added to it as the baby boomers come out, fewer 18-year-olds entering the workforce. If the migration out of the state, and we tend to, as Kate mentioned, we tend to be an exporter of people. More people leave than come here. If all of these things keep building, we've not yet seen. We have lost in the last due to COVID, we've gone back to 2008 to the level of jobs we have in Iowa today. So we've lost a decade of growth. So companies have to first fight to get back to where they were. And then if they want to grow, and there's huge potential to grow, they're going to have to fight even harder. So this is going to become more complex. It is not going to be solved after COVID. So, multiple people mentioned pay. Those that take care of their people are going to win this war. Benefits, Mike mentioned, I think. One size does not fit all. That's a thing of the past. You're going to have to do the basics, healthcare and such, but different kinds of people need different things. What a woman with small children needs is different than a 65 to 75-year-old. And if you're going to try to attract people into the workforce in the future, you're going to have to be savvy enough to be able to change your benefits, how you run your company, to take advantage of who's left. More and more companies have had to say, I prefer full-time people, but all I can find is part-time people. So now I've got to shift how I work to be able to allow this coming and going of people and remote work and et cetera. We are in for a big flux in how companies do business in the next 5 to 10 years in Iowa.
With that in mind, sky's the limit. What's your wish list in terms of combating some of that bleak or some of that trending that you're talking about? What if you could, have whatever you want to throw at this, what would you put on that list?
Are you asking Mike and Kate?
I'm asking you. I'll ask them next, but do you want a minute and I'll come back to you?
No. I don't need it.
I have a feeling you have that wish list top of mind, though.
So it's a dark picture. Maybe I'm painting, but let me tell you, I see Mike every day sees companies that are winning this battle. They are thinking innovatively. They're changing their past practices. They see the opportunity. I had a company tell me, man, maybe we should mandate vaccines. We might be able to pull employees away from other companies that are working for a company that is not mandating. And so they're looking at, something as politicized as vaccination as a strategic opportunity to grow their company. The sky's the limit. We see companies dramatically changing what they're doing. And are they knocking it out of the park? Not yet. They're starting. This is just, everybody's rebounding from COVID, and they're now seeing that they need to change. And some of these companies are really doing some cool things to win the talent war.
Kate.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of the things that we also need to look at, if it were if it were a perfect world, we really need to allow for younger people to understand what jobs are out there. I'm at the end of the Gen X generation and have had a lot of different jobs in my life, and I meet with companies daily. And I'm still like, wow, I didn't know you could get paid to do that. And if we could capture those opportunities and those explorations and those tours and job shadows, internships for kids who are predominantly getting the information about jobs that are out there from TV and other screen-based, and they're not necessarily reflecting the reality of what's around them. And so I really think that we could see a big change in if we were to work with our school systems to encourage, to create, to open the doors so that younger people, and I'm talking elementary school, maybe, 4th, 5th grade, all the way through high school, not starting at their junior and senior year. Because a kid has to get interested in something, before high school so they can make the right choices as far as what their academics look like. And so the more that we can have young people, and for businesses to figure out the best ways to allow for kids to come and view them and see the businesses, see how it operates, sees what the tools are, how cool it is, or for businesses to take that to the classroom. And all over their state, there's lots of different ways that companies can get involved. The STEM Council offers lots of different job fairs and career exploration. The intermediate networks also have lots of opportunities. So it's just a matter of kind of finding out where you get that information and then being willing to say yes more often than no when it comes to interacting with those young people.
Mike.
You have something on my wish list, Karis, but before I get to that, I want to say Kate brought it up, and so I'm going to plug something we do now, and that's Elevate Iowa. If you go to elevateiowa.com, you'll see our effort to try to attract young kids and to tell them about the wide variety of jobs that are available doing incredibly fun things. So anyway, good point, Kate. Here's the thing that's on my wish list. I wish that the federal government would pass some sort of meaningful immigration reform. We need more people in the state. Immigration is one way to do that. People sometimes are surprised to hear that our organization feels so strongly about it, but we need more people. A ton of people that want to come here, that want to live here and work here. And gosh, that'd be the top of my wish list if we could have some sort of meaningful immigration reform that would get more people into the nation, into Iowa sooner.
That's
okay. Can I jump in? You've sparked more wish lists. Okay, so I've been given a talk about workforce around the state, and by far, echoing what Mike said, more and more people are interested in immigration, and both sides at the state level, at the federal level, to get this figured out. Just figured out. People they know we have population problems. And I'm not saying everybody wants this, but businesses are telling me on a daily basis, figure out immigration. Here's the rest of my wish list, and it's lengthy. Companies working together. They're not going to solve some of these problems by themselves. Things like daycare shortages. And tied to that, my wish list is for government to help the companies figure it out, not to be telling them how to do it, but to deal with whatever laws or whatever issues are making it tough for companies and communities to work together to solve some of those issues. I wish more of that would happen. Two other things that Iowa desperately needs, and that is productivity improvements, what we call virtual people. If we're not going to have more people, we've got to get more out of the people we have. That leads to wage growth. There's nothing wrong with being more efficient. Iowa is in the bottom half of states in how productive we are in terms of gross domestic product per employee. And if we move up, we will pay higher wages. It will keep kids here that want to go to Minneapolis and Chicago and Denver for higher wages. And we have not done a good job over the last 20 years in dramatically improving processes in government, in manufacturing, in construction, et cetera. We need it throughout Iowa. And tied to it would be Industry 4.0 later. I say the machines aren't coming, they're here. If you go to McDonald's and you buy a Coke, the first time a human being touches that Coke is when the person puts the lid on it and hands it out the door. There are companies working on robot fry making. So your fries are going to be made by the robots, and companies that get into Industry 4.0 and look at automation and computers talking to machines. It's not taking jobs away, it's supplementing your people. So your people can be used on less dangerous tasks and less monotonous tasks and more important tasks. So what is my wish list? It's long. Fix immigration. Get rid of any policies that are preventing companies from working together in a community. Become more productive and start looking at machines.
And I don't think that's a long wish list at all. I think that's a good start.
May I jump in again, CIRAS, real quick? Whenever I talk about, and maybe Ron gets this too, but when I talk about automation or immigration, I still hear from people, well, don't those take, in the case of automation, doesn't that take a job away from a human? Or in the case of immigration, gosh, don't the immigrants then take jobs from Americans? Yes and yes, they do take jobs away, whether it's automation or immigration. The point is there are plenty of jobs out there in automation, as Ron said, that allows the humans to do much more meaningful value-added work. The case of immigration, there are so many great jobs out there that nobody will lose a job, nobody will be harmed. That's for sure. The opportunity is huge.
And CIRAS, I wanted to also mention, Ron had talked about the childcare and that issue and how it's affecting the labor and available workers. The state, I think, has just announced the official Future Ready Iowa childcare grant applications. I think that hit the website, futurereadyiowa.gov yesterday. And so it's a grant, it's a matching grant that allows for communities, businesses, individuals, daycare centers to work together to figure out how to solve the childcare challenges that are facing their local areas. So that's one thing to kind of businesses can look at right now as a way that they can help turn the tide on some of that, because childcare availability and affordability are really, really impacting who's out there available to work.
That's thank you for that. And childcare, like it's been said previously, there are several things that the pandemic highlighted that were existing problems, and shortages in childcare availability was certainly a big one. And we've just seen that magnified by the pandemic. I have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one from Kaylee Wilson, she pointed out that we have a bit of a negative narrative going on right now related to unemployment benefits, and where there's sort of this message that's coming from maybe some employers and some others where the idea is that people are lazy and that's why they're not going back to work. And her question is, how do we stop perpetuating that negative stigma around people who are not necessarily getting back into the workforce as quickly as we had anticipated? And Mike, because you seem like you're trying to avoid eye contact with me on that one.
Well, you're big on my screen, so I'm not trying to avoid it. That is certainly a narrative. I've heard it too. And all I can say is I'm probably biased by the fact that I represent employers.
Sure.
boy, employers aren't saying that. They're looking for people. I don't know how to respond except to say that
Yeah.
that's obviously a false narrative. And employers the employers I work with aren't saying that. And,
It's, I think there, negative voices tend to be pretty loud voices. And we give them, we apply more numbers to them maybe than they deserve. Maybe.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, if somebody says that, show them a plot of the US unemployment rate for the last 50 years and Iowa's unemployment rate. I found about 2 months when we got high enough to be at the US average, and that was at the depth of the farm crisis in the early 80s. We have historically low unemployment. And even though it's crept up due to COVID, it's higher in the rest of the country, for most of the rest of the country. So we do need to change the spin. There are people that have left the workforce, so they're not on unemployment. They've left. And you have to figure out why, and you have to address the root issues that are keeping them from working. If I have a person that has a decent job and benefits, then the partner might make less money. For them to enter the workforce, they now have maybe daycare costs and transportation costs and clothing costs, and they eat out more because both people are working. The net income to the family can be quite small. And the wages have to be high enough and benefits to offset all those increased expenses that come. And I think what people found in COVID is I made less, but my expenses went down too, and our quality of life may have increased. So nobody's against an improved quality of life. We want people to work, but they have to make a wage so that their quality of life for the whole family is better.
Maybe gets
the
back.
data shows, I'm sorry, the data shows that Iowans work. So the narrative is false. You can look at the data that Ron and Kate have also talked about it. Iowans work.
And maybe it gets back to what you were saying.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead, Kate.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one of the things because I hear that a lot, people, they just don't want to work. And part of me, after, kind of thinking about it and seeing some it's a little bit more complicated. And so that's a simple way of thinking about it. But the complexity of what's really going on is much deeper, and it's hard to think about. And part of the conversation has to really be that hard look at your own company and your own practices, because it may not just be that people don't want to work. They don't necessarily want to work for you. And that's a really hard thing to integrate and say, now, how can we change that? Because some of the companies that are going to really feel this pinch are going to have to look at what are they doing, not only with their hiring practices, but their culture, wages, benefits. It's a lot more stuff that has to be considered to be really competitive in the current market.
That's a great point. We have another question from Michelle Phyllis. Do you have any particular recommendations for the nonprofit, not-for-profit sector for their unique needs, given that they cannot necessarily raise prices to pass through for higher compensation? What I think you were getting at this a little bit, but what are some other things that they can do in terms of culture or benefits or perks, maybe?
Well, let me jump in and say, I guess I'm going to disagree a little bit with the premise. Every entity out there can become more efficient at what they do. You can get more out the door. Whatever your service or product is, there's always room for improvement. And if you can get more out the door, then you're making more than what you were before. And in theory, then some of that savings could go to higher wages, higher benefits. Now, some not-for-profits, their revenue stream might be fixed or something like that. I would still challenge any not-for-profit. There's a lot of money in the world, and maybe you're just narrowly defining what your revenue streams might be. So I think why would anybody go work for a company where you tell me my wages are going to be flat forever? I mean, you've defined a model to fail. Even not-for-profits should be looking to get more efficient and better at what they do. Now, stepping back, you're going to have to be more flexible. People are looking for more options. Can I work from home 1 day a week, 2 days a week? Can I work part-time? You're going to have to look at providing some no or low-cost benefits to keep those people working for you instead of someone else that isn't willing to do that.
Mike or Kate?
I was going to say the same thing. The great thing about nonprofits, in many cases anyway, is that they can be more flexible and innovative. And as Ron said, you try to focus on those no cost or low cost benefits or practices that will be meaningful to potential workers.
Something concrete that a nonprofit could consider is there are, I don't have a number off the top of my head, but there are many, many, many people in Iowa that are receiving Social Security benefits due to a disability, which puts them at a threshold of earnings that they can continue to receive that benefit. And so there is an aspect of a fixed income that they can earn, and tapping into the disabled workers could be a way that as a nonprofit, if you're like, we're not going to be able to provide necessarily these really high wages, but the workers that are on the Social Security disability benefit, they don't necessarily want the really high wages, because then it would change some of the other benefits that they have in their life. And so the agency, Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services, would be a really good connection to find out about potential employees and candidates that would fit your needs.
I may jump in on that. Kate raised an interesting point. Individuals with a disability solve another problem, and that is retention. They tend to be stay at a job. And you might, it's shocking to some people, but Iowa is typically one of the bottom 20% of states in swings in unemployment. We do not do well in retaining our people. In part because of the weather. California, Texas, you can build roads in the winter, and we can't in Iowa very well. And you can farm in Florida and Texas in the winter, and not as well in Iowa. And we have a lot of manufacturing, and manufacturing tends to be cyclic as demand for products comes and goes. So we have been a state of laying people off and hiring them back, retraining them, laying them off, hiring them back, retraining them. It's costly. And my belief is the future of Iowa is when you lay someone off, someone else is going to hire them. And when you're ready to swing back up, they're not going to be there. So trying to figure out how to level load the demand for what you produce or your services is going to be much more critical, I believe, in the future for Iowa companies, so that you are not going through these cycles. Every time you lay somebody off, I have to first hire somebody back to get back to where I was. And if I want to grow, then I need to find another person. It just adds to the problems.
Kate, you had mentioned that that child care grant, and Lisa Kramer wanted to know if iowagrants.gov is where you can get information on that. I did look it up, and that appears to be a place to get the information. Is there another link or a better place to get that?
Yeah, I would actually recommend looking at futurereadyiowa.gov.
Okay.
Because there's, I think it's maybe considered plainer language, so it's a little bit easier maybe to grasp before you get into the much more formal grants.gov website. That's really the application and the rubrics and all that. And futureready.gov will also have like the employer innovation grant that's going to be coming out soon, information about the last dollar scholarship, and some of the other grants that are coming through that particular legislation. Those grants get posted on that website.
Adam Potter asked for thoughts on connecting people to jobs. Where to start, and I think Kate, that would really be your milieu. So if you want to start with that one?
Sure. I mean, one of the easiest things you can do is make sure that you're connected with your local Iowa Works office. There's 16 offices and 2 satellites across the state. I sit in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area, and we host recruiting events weekly, and then supplement them with larger events. And so we've got staff that work with candidates daily. And so that's a very easy first step. And then connecting with your industry sector boards would be another one. That's through the Department of Education, typically facilitated by the community college. And then the third, I think relatively simple and straightforward, is to connect to the intermediary network in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area. They're called Workplace Learning Connections, but they're going to be all over in the various AEA regions. And companies can connect with high school students, and in some cases, middle school students, about how do I encourage these young people to learn about the opportunities. The vocational rehabilitation services also offer job analysis, where they would actually come in and review and document a particular job. And then they would work with the client to see whether or not it was a good fit. And so those are some other options where you can work with that population as well. I mean, you can even interact with the prison system. I can't remember the statistics, but it's very large number of returning citizens who come out of incarceration and come back into our communities. Many of them have had lots of training in high demand fields, but they carry the stigma of they've got a background that shows that they've had some criminal activity. So being able to connect with their apprenticeship programs or some of their other work training programs is another way to start that connection and follow that kind of path of what kinds of candidates. And these are those hidden pockets of potential candidates that are all over the state. So, you can try any one of those and get connected.
Mike or Ron, from the employer's perspective too, those traditional methods like print ads, it's costly. People don't necessarily see them. We know that the subscription numbers are down. Indeed, or some of the ZipRecruiter, some of those others, they can be costly for the employer, as well as it's they're trying to sell premium services to the job seeker as well. What are there other ways for companies to find that workforce?
Well, I'll jump in and say, I was going to say that I thought we were talking about where employees could find work. I'll come to employers in a minute, but Kara, she started this discussion by talking about the fact that it was a workers or an employees market. That's 100% right. And I know this maybe is going to sound simplistic or trite. I don't mean it to be. I mean quite seriously that if I was an employee looking for a job and there was a certain employer I wanted to work for, whether I knew anything about whether or not they were hiring or not, I'd go to that employer because I can almost guarantee they are. If there's somebody in your area that has a reputation for being a terrific workplace with great pay and benefits, boy, I'd head over there. You can't drive down a street anywhere in Iowa without seeing a help wanted sign just about every place you go. So I think it really is an employees market. And you mentioned all the online sites and everything else. I think employers are understanding that some of those expensive ways or traditional ways like print ads, that's not necessarily the best way to go about it anymore. So employers are doing a lot of outreach that Kate talked about a while back in our discussion about working with their local school district, working with their community college, trying to make sure that they're identifying students who might want to be future employees. That seems to be a much better way for employers to make a hire than some of those old traditional expensive ways. That's my sense anyway, from what I hear.
And I'll add with an anecdotal piece. I had a company tell me that they've heard that within the Latino community, they're perceived as not open to Latino workers because English was mandatory. That was not the case, but that was on the street. So I've had several companies say, how do we get to that community and make sure they understand that we're open, our culture is open to that community? I think that applies to any kind of worker. Are you open to part-time workers? If you're in the construction industry, are you open to female employees? The perception is out there that you're not. So all the different kind of people that are not working, that could work, or part-time, that could work full-time, you have to be marketing that you're open to that kind of person. And the we're hiring sign says, we're open to everybody, y'all come. And I think the marketing of the future in Iowa is going to be much more targeted.
Well, we have just a few minutes left. I believe that we have gotten to the questions that we have from attendees. So I would like to give you would all get about a minute or so if you have any closing remarks or any last thoughts you'd like to leave our attendees with, starting with Kate.
Sure. I mean, closing thoughts are really, it's about reconsidering all of your practices, whether it's the business practice and running the business itself and how you do that, but also your hiring practices. I hear so often from companies, well, our insurance wouldn't cover that. And in my mind, because I don't understand the complexity, I was like, don't you buy a policy that you create and agree to? So maybe reviewing how you're posting the jobs themselves, the job descriptions, the application, the interview process, all of those things contribute to what people say to each other about whether or not it's like, oh yeah, go there. That's a great place. It was really easy to get your application in. Those word of mouth things really affect whether or not people want to come and work for you. And right now, the best thing that you can do is to have the least restrictive information out there and say, here's what we'd like you to be able to do. And here's what we expect minimally to get that person interested, to show them to show you that they're interested. All of the other things I think can come after, because the best thing that you want to do right now is to say, this is why you want to come work for us. Here's what we have to offer you. Here's what we're looking for. And then go through all of that kind of legal compliance stuff afterwards to make sure that it's an appropriate hire. But you've got to first get them in the door, even interested. And that's where I think a lot of companies aren't doing as good of a job as they could. And it's word of mouth, it's social media, it's print, it's television, it's broadcast, it's podcast. I mean, you name it, you want to use every avenue to basically say, here's why you want to come work for us.
Mike?
I don't want to be that's all good. I think I've added what I was going to share, so I'll just defer to Ron if he's got some closing comments.
Okay, so I would say for anybody listening, you need to do one thing, and that is leadership has to admit that the future isn't the past. All the easy people have been pulled into the workforce. You're going to have to admit that after COVID, this problem isn't going away, which means you're going to have to change how you do business. If you're not willing to do that one thing, admit that you're going to have to do change, then I don't know that there's anything I could recommend you do. If you decide the future is going to be more difficult, then is the next step. You need to strategize and determine who you're going after. And then everything Kate says applies, everything Mike said applies. There's lots of training that will need to be done. The future is different, but you first have to admit it and then change how you go about it.
It's a great thought to end on. I thank everyone who attended this panel today. Thank you to our speakers, Kate Pine, Mike Ralston, and Ron Cox. And thank you to the Gazette and our event sponsors for putting on this wonderful event and offering it to us for free. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.